B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Wednesday, January 22nd, 2020. Like many Americans, I was up late last night watching the marathon opening day session of the impeachment trial of Donald Trump. And for the duration of the impeachment process in general, I'm going to refer to the impeachment in part 2 of the podcast because there's a lot of coverage of impeachment, and I want to make sure that other stories don't get lost in the media maelstrom of the impeachment drama. So in a few minutes, we'll get to that, but I want to lead today with some challenges to independent media and independent reporters. Yesterday, I briefly mentioned that Glenn Greenwald, who lives in Brazil, co-founder of The Intercept, the guy who got the Snowden file, well, he is under pressure in Brazil by the far right-wing government of Jair Bolsonaro. And as you may know, over the last 9 months or so, Greenwald got access to some hacked communications, phone messages and text messages, and he is now being accused of perpetrating the hack. Now, this is strikingly similar to the claims by the United States in the extradition attempt to bring Julian Assange from London to the United States. He is being accused of instructing Chelsea Manning, back in the day when she was Bradley Manning, on exactly how to hack and what to hack in U.S. military archives. And, of course, the hacking charge gets them around claims of infringement on freedom of the press because they're alleging criminal behavior. Well, Ed Snowden has come to Greenwald's defense. This is unbelievably naked retaliation for revealing extreme corruption at the highest levels of Bolsonaro's administration and an existential threat to investigative journalism in Brazil. Now, a quick thumbnail. Bolsonaro came to power after a judge named Moro led the investigation called Car Wash that produced the impeachment of President Dilma Rousseff, the jailing of the other leader of the Popular Party, Lula da Silva, better known as Lula. And so now they're trying to crack down on the leaks that have embarrassed and undermined the anti-corruption investigation. And Greenwald is their target. Now, for a great recap, I have linked to, in the show file, Kevin Gostola's article published yesterday at Shadowproof. And he does a good job of explaining the background here. According to Greenwald, a source hacked into the phones of Brazilian prosecutors obtained details from years of conversations with the judge. The archive of material is bigger than the archive of documents from NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden. Well, that triggers one of my beefs. Glenn Greenwald has never shared with us the exact scope of the Snowden documents, and we believe we've only seen published a small percentage, and of course not even complete publication of things like the PRISM PowerPoint slides that describe that program that's a clear violation of our Fourth Amendment rights. Also, in the article by Gostola, he cites a statement from Trevor Timm at the Freedom of the Press Foundation. Greenwald is our friend and longtime colleague. He has bravely fought for journalistic freedom throughout his entire career. These sham charges are a sickening escalation of the Bolsonaro administration's authoritarian attacks on press freedom and the rule of law. They cannot be allowed to stand. And Tim added, we call on the Brazilian government to immediately halt its persecution of Greenwald and respect press freedom, as the Brazilian Supreme Court has already ordered them to do. Then there are libel claims. Presidential candidate and Hawaii Democratic Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard has announced she is filing a $50 million libel suit against Hillary Clinton. This goes back to last fall when Hillary gave an interview This was on a podcast with David Plouffe, a former Obama advisor. Now, what Clinton said was that she spoke of one cabinet candidate, quote, she is a favorite of the Russians. They have a bunch of sites and bots and other ways of supporting her so far. And that's assuming Jill Stein will give it up, which she might not because she's also a Russian asset. Yep, she's a Russian asset. Now, a Clinton spokesperson confirmed that Clinton was talking about Tulsi Gabbard, but I argue here that the syntax is confusing. And because she interjected Jill Stein into her attack, presumed attack on Gabbard, I think that this is a bit of an uphill struggle. But I support the central notion that Clinton intentionally smeared Tulsi Gabbard, and I also support her desire to push back. By the way, after smearing Bernie Sanders, who has no friends and has never gotten anything done, Queen Hillary, through a spokesperson, announced last night that she has amended her position and that she will vote for anyone who becomes the Democratic presidential nominee. Meanwhile, our friends at Consortium News, led by editor Joe Lauria, have filed notices in Canadian courts naming the Canadian Signals Intelligence Agency, the equivalent of the NSA, and a major TV network as the sources of libelous claims against Consortium News that it's been part of a cyber influence campaign directed by Russia. Now, as you know, I am a big supporter of Consortium News, going back to its founder, Robert Perry, who died a couple of years ago. I've known Joe Lauria since before he took over Consortium News. I have appeared on their live video feed, CN Live. And they have done courageous and honest reporting about Russiagate starting under Perry and about many other issues. Now, at the center of this are articles that were published at Consortium News about a Canadian public official whose name is Chrystia Freeland, and she's now a deputy prime minister. And in the reporting, it was revealed that her father was, in fact, a journalist who produced Nazi propaganda during World War II in occupied Poland. And she had kind of written that out of her history and resume. In her own autobiography, she elides over what it's her grandfather, by the way. I'm sorry, I claimed it was her father. So she had some family secrets, and they were exposed, and then she pushed back and suggested that this was Russian propaganda after she became Foreign Affairs Minister in the administration of Justin Trudeau. So this is a smear that needs to be addressed. I fully support Consortium News for using the Canadian legal system to defend itself and protect its rights. And I expect smears like this to be more frequent in the United States, and in some cases they already are. Over at the Gray Zone Project, Ben Norton has done it again. They're exposing mainstream media malpractice because the corporate media has shown no interest in revisiting what are now pretty clearly known as false claims about the release of chemical weapons in Douma, Syria in April of 2018. And with video from the White Helmets, the United States and many other Western countries immediately assumed that the claims were true. The United States launched missile strikes against Syria at that time in a claim of retaliation for the use of chemical agents. And now we know through the courageous testimony at a UN meeting by Ian Henderson, who was a 12-year veteran of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. He was one of the field inspectors sent to Douma after the alleged incident, and his reports were suppressed, and he and his other team members were sidelined as the OPCW responded to pressure from Western governments to issue a report that confirmed their false claims of chemical agents being used in Douma on that particular date. And I want to commend Caitlin Johnstone. She is the Australian columnist and commentator who has pursued this issue with dogged determination. And Norton cites MIT professor, now emeritus, Ted Postal. The evidence is overwhelming that the gas attacks were staged. And now, through the testimony of Mr. Henderson, we learn about the internal machinations of the OPCW. And Henderson told the Security Council by the time of the release of the interim report in July of 2018, our understanding was that we had serious misgivings that a chemical attack had occurred. After this inspection that led to the interim report, however, Henderson said the leadership decided to create a new team, the so-called FFM core team, which essentially resulted in the dismissal of all of the inspectors who'd been on the team deployed to locations in Douma and had been following up with their findings and analysis. Then in March of 19, this new OPCW team released a final report in which it claimed that chemical weapons had been used in Douma. Now, polls go up and down. They are a snapshot in time. But we have an interesting snapshot for you today, a new CNN poll, where it shows on a national sampling that Bernie Sanders has picked up 7 points since the last poll was taken in December. It puts him in first place nationwide. And in analysis supplied by David Sirota at the Sanders campaign, he has made gains across the board, pulling away from Warren among liberals. 33% back Sanders, 19% supporting Warren. Sanders has also pulled about even with Biden among voters of color. 30% for Sanders, 27% for Biden. Another poll shows 56% of African Americans say they would consider voting for Sanders. And a Reuters Ipsos poll shows Bernie at 20%, putting him in first place for the first time in that survey, a pickup of 6 points since December. Now, not all these polls were in the field before the orchestrated attacks that I detailed for you yesterday that have hit Sanders, starting with Elizabeth Warren, then picked up by by Joe Biden, and then the Monday morning surprise from Hillary Clinton. So it remains to be seen if there is impact from these attacks. But the New York Times writes about the new CNN poll. Bernie Sanders has narrow lead in new national poll. To be fair, a second poll released today by Monmouth University shows Biden in the lead with 30% and Sanders in second with 24%. But in both polls, Elizabeth Warren is third with 14%. So her backstabbing of Sanders doesn't appear to have an immediate effect. Then Philip Bump at the Washington Post offers some analysis. He says if you're going to surge in a presidential primary, a few weeks before the Iowa caucuses is a good time to do it. And the new poll suggests that Sanders may be doing just that. And he notes the poor timing of the polling surges of Senator Warren, who peaked in October, and Kamala Harris of California, who surged back in June and quickly lost support. And that is a fair comment. So he writes here, the CNN poll shows a big jump since its last survey in December. CNN polling shows Sanders slowly building support since October and former Vice President Joe Biden slowly fading. Now, I think that this is a promising report. As I say, we can't rely on these polls as anything more than a snapshot in time. But I, frankly, am encouraged by what voters are telling pollsters. The battle between Biden and Bernie continues. A day after Biden accepted Bernie's apology for the Zephyr Teach-Out column, which I don't think was unfair, Biden released a video only on social media, so he's not putting any money behind this on television, but suggesting that the Sanders campaign is engaging in dishonest attacks. Biden? Bernie's negative attacks won't change the truth. Joe Biden is still the strongest Democrat to beat Donald Trump. And the counterattack from Biden is on Bernie's record on guns. And it's fair to say that in the 90s, he didn't really see a significance in gun control legislation, and he has made it pretty clear that he's changed on that. But it's a fair attack if you're going to attack Joe Biden for his long-running advocacy for cuts to Social Security. So I think it's a worthy fight over the issues, and as long as they don't get too personal, I think it's okay. And whose side do you want to be on when Trump acknowledged to reporters in Davos, Switzerland, at the World Economic Forum today, asked by CNBC if cuts to entitlements would be on his plate, Trump said yes. At some point they will be. At the right time, we will take a look at that. Now, this is pretty vague, but in his budgets, Trump has repeatedly advocated for cutbacks to Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. And that is a record that is pretty clear. Yesterday, I ran out of time before I could comment on the unusual, some might call it bizarre, editorial endorsements by the New York Times of Amy Klobuchar and Elizabeth Warren. And yesterday I noted how they dismissed Bernie Sanders as too old and too extreme, a divisive figure in Washington, they called him. And it's interesting, in their endorsement of Senator Warren, they note that in their interview with her, that she wouldn't detail her plans to deal with the conservative courts in attempting to pass a wealth tax. Now, I support her wealth tax. I think it ultimately could pass, but it's fair to say that there will be court challenges. But here's where the New York Times feels that she is not sufficiently loyal to corporate America. Quote, she sometimes sounds like a candidate who sees a universe of us versus thems, who in the general election would be going up against a president who has already divided America into his own version of them and us. This has been most obvious in her case for Medicare for All, where she has already had to soften her message as voters have expressed their lack of support for her plan. Warren's version would require winning over a skeptical public, legislative trench warfare, the dismantling of a private health care system. And they go on. American capitalism is responsible for its share of sins, but Warren often casts the net far too wide, placing the blame for a host of maladies from climate change to gun violence at the feet of the business community when the onus is on society as a whole. Then they move on to Amy Klobuchar, and they validate their support for her by noting that she has sponsored and voted on dozens of national defense measures, including military action in Libya and Syria. I don't think there's much to be proud of there. They praise her as the most productive senator among the Democratic field in terms of bills passed. Then they note reports of how Klobuchar treats her staff give us pause. They raise concerns about her ability to attract and hire talented people. Nevertheless, because she's a moderate, because she's a Midwesterner, and because she's not Bernie Sanders, the New York Times is reaching below the top tier of Democratic candidates to try to promote Amy Klobuchar as a contender. We'll see how that works. News leaking out of Kabul, Afghanistan, the U.S. and Taliban leaders are reported close to reaching a peace deal that could see the eventual withdrawal of American troops 18 years after Bush dispatched them there. Detectives hired by Jeff Bezos are claiming that Jeff's phone was hacked, and that was followed up by the texting of photos of his ex-wife and his new partner or companion. I don't know what their relationship is. Anyway, they are alleging that the phone belonging to Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman appears to have been used to hack into the cell phone of Jeff Bezos. 6 months after the hack of Bezos' phone, Jamal Khashoggi was lured into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, where he was killed and dismembered by a team of Saudi agents. And the experts say, at a time when Saudi Arabia was supposedly investigating the killing of Khashoggi and prosecuting those it deemed responsible, it was clandestinely waging a massive online campaign against Bezos and Amazon, targeting him principally as the owner of the Washington Post. The statement cited a 2019 forensic analysis of Bezos' phone that assessed with medium to high confidence that his phone had been infiltrated on May 1st of 2018 when an MP4 video file sent from a WhatsApp account used personally by the Saudi Crown Prince. I guess Jeff clicked on that video because it had a bunch of spyware that infected his phone. And a few months later, Bezos received that message that included a photo of his now girlfriend, Lauren Sanchez. Over at the Grammys, they're getting ready for the annual music awards show. And there is a whole lot of controversy. This occurs as Harvey Weinstein's trial gets underway in New York. And Deborah Dugan, the chief executive of the Grammys, it's NARAS, the National Association of Recording Arts and Sciences, she was suspended from her job amid vague allegations of misconduct. Well, now she's firing back with a 44-page legal complaint saying that her predecessor, Neil Portnow, resigned to avoid charges of having raped a female recording artist who is from outside the United States. Otherwise, she is unnamed. And then Ms. Dugan says that she was pressured into approving a $750,000 a year consulting gig for Portnow. And now, amid allegations that she is a bad boss who fostered a toxic and intolerable work environment, she is saying that is payback for her efforts to clean up the mess there at the Grammys and NARAS. And finally, in our lead segment today, Terry Jones, one of the co-founders of Monty Python's Flying Circus, has died at the age of 77. He was one of the founders of the group, and I don't know about you, but I used to watch it on PBS in the 1970s and 80s, and I enjoyed their feature films, including, of course, Holy Grail and Life of Brian, which Terry Jones directed. We're going to miss him, and maybe in the future I'll be able to meet him at the argument clinic. Well, now we turn to our impeachment report for today, and as I noted yesterday, the scheduling of these hearings starting at 1 o'clock Eastern Time and continuing deep into the night makes it difficult for me to cover. So what I've decided to do is watch in the evening and then report the next day. So my comments on day one? Well, it was fascinating to see the Democrats, who suffer from being in the minority in the Senate and thus don't have much clout, presented 11 detailed resolutions, amendments to Mitch McConnell's rules, which were fashioned to do everything to tilt the trial in favor of the defendant, Donald Trump. And so I thought they did a good job. The House managers, mostly it was Adam Schiff, but others got a turn as the day progressed. And they kept making pretty strong arguments by citing evidence, by playing videos of the testimony from the impeachment inquiry in the House. And I thought they, while they weren't building the case brick by brick, they presented highlights that challenged the cultish denial of the Republican impeachment lawyers and the slavish Republicans in the Senate, who are so afraid of Donald Trump that only one person broke from the 53 pack of the majority, Susan Collins from Maine, who voted in favor with the Democrats only once out of the 11 issues. And it was a pretty trivial resolution. But by going through this process and keeping everybody up, including the aging members of the Senate, until almost 2 in the morning, the Democrats laid the basics for a case. That this is not a fair trial, that they are not being affirmed in ability to present witnesses and documents. And the only real shift that came from the strong-armed leader of the Senate, Mitch McConnell, was that he relented. Instead of giving each side 24 hours over 2 days, he's giving them 24 hours over 3 days. So today's hearing should be only 8 hours, and that's a relief to a guy like me who's going to go home and zip through the videos on my DVR. But what was most stunning to me is how the Trump lawyers, led by Pat Cipollone, did not respond to the essence of the charges in the case, except to trivialize them and just say there's no case here, that the Democrats aren't ready to bring their case. That's why they're demanding evidence and witnesses. And Cipollone made it very personal, attacking Adam Schiff from the very first time he spoke. He ridiculed him. He, like I say, it was uncomfortable how personal he got. Then you get Jay Sekulow, who trotted out a bunch of half-truths and talking points with a great deal of aggressive ardor. That Trump is a victim, the House process was unfair because there was no cross-examination right for the president. And at one point, Sekulow trashed the Mueller report, and then seconds later he quoted the Mueller report in its quote of the stroke-page text messages about looking for an insurance policy to prevent Donald Trump from being elected. And so the Republican approach is to talk about process, to portray the president as a victim, that this is just an ongoing plot by the Democrats to rerun the 2016 election. And the amount of bullshit that is flying out of the Republican side is amazing. And I think you know that I was skeptical of Ukraine as a basis for impeachment. I still think it should not be the only one. But the Democrats have built a strong case, and with Lev Parnas and John Bolton claiming that they're willing to testify, the idea that the Republicans can operate in this bubble of denial and say, well, the House didn't prove its case. They got their fingers crossed about Parnas, about Bolton, about Mulvaney. And so I am persuaded that the Democrats have a strong enough case to argue for impeachment. It would be stronger if the clear crimes of the Michael Cohen plea deal and other cases were included. And this claim that the Democrats aren't ready is cover for the fact that they have been kept from getting at witnesses and documents by Trump. And that is the basis of the second charge of obstruction. So I think that while the Democrats have the advantage in terms of facts and rhetoric, the Republicans control the venue. And unless they can drive a wedge and separate at least 4 Republican senators from the pack, the outcome will be as predicted by the Republicans. And as we look at that, we do have to look down the road and think about, okay, well, what happens? If Trump is not impeached and removed, he claims vindication. And will he get a bounce from that? Will people feel sorry for this great victim of the Democratic impeachment drive? Well, we won't know until later this year. But it was stunning to watch resolution after resolution, a total of 11 of them, get debated and then shut down through the parliamentary maneuver called tabling. McConnell would get up there and he'd say, I want to table this. And then the Chief Justice would order the yeas and the nays. The only time that John Roberts really got exercised beyond calling breaks and, identifying who gets to speak next came at almost 2 o'clock in the morning, D.C. time. And he issued a statement which he called an admonishment of both sides. Now, my DVR failed to record Gerald Nadler's arguments over the resolution to send a subpoena to John Bolton. But apparently he and Cipollone got pretty testy. And so the Chief Justice said that he was admonishing both of them that they needed to recognize where they were in the most deliberative body in the world. And that was his big cameo appearance for the day and the night. And when we look at this, first of all, I want to mention that the Senate rules have the video feed locked down. There are only 2 or 3 cameras, and the only one with a decent angle on the people speaking is the one that points at Mitch McConnell and other people who are on the Senate floor when they speak. But the angle on the lawyers, both parties, is shooting down on them. And so if they want to address the camera, they have to look up, and it makes them look like they're on a surveillance camera. That could easily be rectified by just putting a camera in front of that podium. But McConnell controls the venue, and that's one reason why we never see a reaction shot of the senators. And if any of them start to nod off, we'll never see that either. If they're angry at what they're, we'll know that. So it is a very controlled video presentation. So at the end of the day, the Republicans prevailed. Their rules were adopted with no amendments, no modification. And the only thing that changed was volunteered by McConnell. And so currently, we're going to see 3 8-hour sessions with the Democratic lawyers making their opening case. Then starting on Saturday, there will be up to 3 days of 8 hours each as the Republicans respond. Speculation is the Republicans won't need 24 hours to recycle the same talking points and half-truths that we heard previewed in yesterday's debates. And today, one of the possible exit ramps where the majority could have moved for a vote to dismiss the charges did not occur. The Republicans would have had to file by 9 a.m. a motion to that effect, and they chose not to do so. But Rand Paul is chomping at the bit. He says 45 Republicans are already ready to dismiss the charges. There are 45 with about 5 to 8 wanting to hear a little more. I would still like to dismiss it, but there aren't the votes to do it just yet. Now that suggests to me that they are afraid that if they let this go full term, that Bolton will testify, others may testify, evidence from Lev Parnas may be introduced. And so they're looking to control this and contain it as much as possible. But, on the other hand, if they flush it too quickly, they're going to have to answer to their own voters about whether this was a fair process. So in Davos, Trump said, "I would rather interview Bolton." I think that's a poor choice of words. I think he means that I'd rather see Bolton interviewed. But then Trump says, well, he knows some of my thoughts. He knows what I think about leaders. What happens if he reveals what I think about a certain leader and it's not very positive? Then I have to deal on behalf of the country. Yeah, think of all those shithole country leaders, Trump. And then he took a swipe at Joe Biden, saying, in apparent reference to his, childhood stuttering, I don't know if Joe's going to limp across the line, but I watch him speaking. He can't put together a sentence. Well, I think that's projection. Trump is really bad in stringing together a meaningful sentence that doesn't include the word disaster. Now, Biden does have limited capabilities in rhetoric as well, but I don't think he's quite as bad as Trump. I do cringe at the idea of the two of them debating if Biden is the Democratic nominee. Here's another series of comments that Trump made at Davos, Switzerland, and these could cause him some problems. He began with his typical denial, so here's the story. Did nothing wrong. The best lawyers in the world have looked at it. The Department of Justice has looked at it, given it a sign-off. There was nothing wrong. Asked if he had seen any of the proceedings, he said, "I got to watch enough. I thought our team did a very good job. But honestly, we have all the material. They don't have the material." Now, that quote could be construed as an admission of guilt, that he is obstructing justice, that he's got the material that the Democrats cannot obtain. Val Demings, one of the House managers, an African-American from Florida, she seized on that point and introduced it into her comments pretty quickly after they were reported. And there was a weird exchange between Jay Sekulow and Val Demings. And it appears that Jay Sekulow just misunderstood what she was saying. And if you've never heard of Jay Sekulow, he has a nonprofit called the American Center for Law and Justice. They intervene in abortion cases, in passing pretextual bans on abortion. And I once looked at the tax returns of ACLJ, and he draws a big salary, and most of his kids are on the payroll too. And he has a nightly radio show that's on the nominally Christian network Salem, which is just a pro-Trump ramble. So the exchange was that Val Demings referred to FOIA lawsuits. And somehow Sekulow thought she said lawyer lawsuits, and then made a denunciation of criticism of lawyer lawsuits that had been spoken by no one save for Jay Sekulow. Now, one of the other discussions, the horse trading going on in Senate chambers, we're being told, is a discussion by Democrats of trading Biden for Bolton, telling the Republicans that if you let John Bolton testify, we will relent and allow Joe Biden and maybe even Hunter Biden to testify. And this horse trading is analyzed by Aaron Blake in the Washington Post, and I think he gets it right. Because if the Democrats agree to this and one or both of the Bidens take the stand, I think it'll end the political career of Joe Biden. It's not only the lack of articulation that I cited in comparison to Trump, but there are unexploded landmines. When you delve into detail about what Joe Biden did in Ukraine, what Hunter Biden did on the board of Burisma, and even if they don't rise to the level of violating the law, there's enough whataboutism to give Trump and his lawyers the opening to say he was right to pressure Ukraine to open an investigation into the Bidens. And then if you put his grifter son on the stand, and you have to hear about the paternity suit, how he was dating his dead brother's widow after his divorce from his wife, his cocaine habit, the amount of money that he got from serving on the board of Burisma for doing almost nothing. And then there's Bolton. If you trade the Bidens for Bolton, how do you know what he will say? He is a movement conservative, a deep partisan. And yeah, he might try to save his own ass by offering negative commentary about the people around Trump, including Rudy Giuliani. But he might also offer exculpatory testimony about Trump. And finally today, there is a report in the New York Times that confirms that right after Trump's July 25th call with President Zelensky of Ukraine, White House officials were working to impose the freeze. Now, this comes from a FOIA lawsuit, the kind that Val Demings was referring to and Jay Sekulow didn't get. But my point here is that we have mounting evidence that the public can see that the Republican senators say they can't see or they won't look at. And how long can they bury their heads in the sand? Can they do it long enough to get away with this? And to avoid impeaching Trump? The odds are definitely in their favor. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. Share it all over the place. It's free. You'll find it on YouTube. And I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you. Until we meet again, happy trails